Hello, my name is Tammy Rose, and welcome to Concord Days. One of my favorite quotes from Henry David Thoreau is books are the treasured wealth of the world and the fit inheritance of generations and nations. I have the honor today to be speaking with author and former curator of special collections at the Concord Public Library, Leslie Wilson. Hi, Leslie. How are you?
Hi.
And we are also joined by amazing woman extraordinaire, Marjorie Merritt, who has founded Glade Press, and who is a general amazing resident of Concord now. Hi, Marjorie. How are you?
Oh, I'm happy. I'm very happy. Hello, Leslie. Hello, Tammy.
Hey. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring us all together today was not only to talk about Leslie's marvelous history with the Concord Library, but also her new book. So can we start with that?
Sure. The name of the book is This is the Life, The Diary of Jenny McLeod, and it's based on the 1914 to 1918 college and just post-college diary of a young woman named Jenny McLeod, who lived in my house in Clinton, Massachusetts. She actually lived here for 52 years between 1916 and her death in 1968. And the book is essentially a transcribed version of the diary, heavily annotated, with a contextual introduction, lots and lots and lots of footnotes. And the footnotes are very important because, I firmly believe in the value of context for understanding material from another time and another place. You can understand text directly to some extent, but there's just a lot of stuff that slips through the cracks if you don't have explanation. And so that's the gist of the book.
I love it. I'm a big fan of footnotes myself. I've written several plays based on actual found text, and I'm always annotating all my plays, and I always want things to be hyperlinked. And, if you are concerned about like this line that you don't understand about, the way somebody creates a recipe or whatever, here is where you can go for more information. So I love it. I really love it.
I began to value footnotes because I studied Latin in college. And there's a point at which you start to read literature instead of just studying grammar and sentence structure and what have you. And at that point, you realize that even if you get the sentence, you understand what the sentence says, you don't really understand what it means because you're talking about something that was 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. And so, you need that background.
Exactly, because it makes it more real, and especially when it comes to details that sometimes can take people out of the narrative.
Right.
If you're working on a piece of literature, it's like you do have time to set the book down and actually try to figure out, what are they talking about here? What is this piece of clothing? What, and switch modalities a little bit.
Right.
So how did you actually find this treasure?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, this is a sort of a, what are the chances kind of story. We moved into this house in Clinton, Massachusetts in 2011, I guess. And one of the things that I started to do right after we moved in here was something that I did as part of my job at Concord, house research. People are always interested in knowing the story of their house before they got there. And, I found a fair amount of information out. And I started, I tend to go down paths following people names rather than, I'm not so much interested in the architectural history of the house. I'm more interested in the stories of the people who lived here before. And when I plugged the name, I found out that somebody named Jenny McLeod had lived here for decades. And I was just doing some random searching on the internet. And all of a sudden, this website for a Canadian book dealer popped up. And I read the entry, and it sure looked like it was the same person. And he described it as the 1914 to 1918 college diary. And, I'm always skeptical. That's part of the whole research process. You need to find more information before you can believe what you found. And so I did a little bit more research, and I realized, yes, that Jenny McLeod had gone to Smith College, and that this was the same woman who lived here for 52 years. And I looked at the price and I thought, nah, I don't actually need that, because it was kind of expensive. And it tormented the heck out of me for 6 months. I kept going back, and I kept seeing, maybe somebody's bought it. Maybe Smith College has bought it. That would have been, the thing that I would have hoped for next after, buying it myself. And eventually I said, oh, come on, this thing has got my name all over it. I've got to have it. And so I made an inquiry about a possible reduction in price, let's say. Yeah. And the dealer was willing to do it. And so I bought the thing. Then I got it. And there was nothing that I could do with it right away, because I had a full-time job at the Concord Library, and a full-time job doesn't mean just 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It means, all of my research energy and effort and the writing projects that I was undertaking all had to do with Concord and with the special collections at the Concord Library. And so I poked around a little bit, and I could see it was a good diary. I could see that there was a lot of social history in it that might be of interest to other people. But I wasn't able to pick it up and work on it until really 2019, when I retired from the Concord Library.
Yeah. No, and I love the story of like thinking about it and finding it online and sort of like, should I buy it? Should I not? And then I really feel like it's because this is how I feel about most books that I buy, and like it doesn't always turn out to be true, but at some point, you're going to be making an investment in your future.
Right. That's right.
Right. So no matter how much you paid for it, I'm sure it was cheap compared to like the joy and the excitement that it's bringing to you.
Oh, absolutely. It was one of the best investments I ever made, I think, because the process, I'm a sucker for documentation of any sort. It's about the process. And this opened up whole realms of research to me. And it basically gave me something to do through the pandemic. And, it was exactly the kind of work that I did at Concord, except that it also allowed me to learn something about this community that I live in, which, again, when you're working full time in a place that's not where you live, you don't have the chance to get to know the place where you live. And so now I feel like I'm a part of this more than I could have been had I not gotten involved with the book, with the
and I feel like there's also that aspect of learning like about the house that you're in and the very specific history. And like you said, it's not the architecture, it's not the the style that somebody else who decides how it's going to be built, all of those intentions. It's about how the space actually gets used. And I find that there are a lot of amateur historians or people who are just beginning to delve into history. Like, so for instance, when I was a kid, my house was built in 1923. And my parents redid the house. And at some point they opened up a wall and they found a little toy car.
Yeah.
And suddenly I had this sense, oh my God, there was a child in this house before me who knew all of its nooks and crannies the way that I did.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's like big history, with a capital H, and then there's the personal history that helps us understand like what time travel is and how to get back in time to realize the people who came before us are we're just as alive as we are today.
Right. Well, you know what? It's about making connections, and so you make connections in all kinds of different ways. But I think that the connections that you make with people in the past are as powerful as the ones that you make with people in the here and now.
Wonderful point.
Oh, I feel like, that it sounds a little Twilight Zone-ish, and I do not mean it that way.
Right. No, and I feel like we're a little too cynical in the age that we're living in about things like Twilight Zone and whatever, and we get away from the idea that there's a little bit of magic, a little bit of coincidence, a little bit of, these stories that long to be told and want to be heard.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like, this is what it is to be human and to be in touch with the past.
That's it. I mean, that's really, I can remember studying Latin in college and realizing at some point that the ancient Romans were just people like you and me. And, that sense of connection is more powerful than anything.
Exactly.
Really, yeah.
Exactly. And I want to bring Marjorie into this conversation as well, because she had also, she has created Glade Press. And one of the books that she created, and this is sort of an aside, is a marvelous art print of her father's watercolors, which is like yet another way to bring people who had done marvelous works into the past into the present.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Marjorie, why did you create Glade, and how did that come about? And what are your biggest accomplishments and prides about that?
It was a collaborative effort. I mean, I founded it because I needed to have a format or a platform for publishing new works by uncommon voices. That was the tagline, publishing new works by uncommon voices. So we meaning myself and Crystal Wright, who's been working with Leslie on her book, and I'm so pleased, and Leslie Denham, who worked with me for 4 years developing this whole concept. First, I was advocates for social reform. That's when I did a lot of social stuff. And then finally, I decided that what is my goal in life? And it's to write my life away. And so I started out by the whole inspiration, though, was Ellen Waterston, who I'm hoping we will all meet here when we do the Right Connection, maybe next fall, because she had written another book of poetry. And she said, well, why don't you form a publishing company and you can publish it and it will be easy. And I thought, oh, well, why not? So then I called my lawyer and we created Glade Press. A moonglade is the sight of the moon shining across the water, which makes different moons. So concept, and that was a painting my father did, and everything links together. So I decided to take my father's gorgeous watercolors, and the history we don't need to go into, but he had died of a sad early death while all this work was just being developed. And so I did an event, and then I did this book. It's the best thing I ever put together because it was a legacy for my father. It's called The Unfinished Visions of Tom Merritt, because he was taken so soon. But then we ended up publishing, Leslie's book included, I think we now, or they now, because I'm not them anymore, 9 books in less than 3 years. 2 children's books. One was translated into Spanish for children, a book about a swan, ultimately died again, but nevertheless, the swan over there in the, I forget the name of do you remember that, Leslie? The swan who lost its mate. I forget the name of the place but forget it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember.
No, it's okay. And then there was just all kinds of things that popped in. So now, I mean, I feel like I've done what I wanted to do by creating an entity that could publish good books, including some of the ones that I'm trying to finish I use Little Books by Many Moons. So I actually have a publishing contract with the company I founded, and also an invitation to bring good works to Crystal and others that we will continue to link east, west, north, south, and dealing with all the, what you've done, Tammy, with Transcendentalist 2021.
On Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, so that's basically it. I mean, I came back to Concord not really knowing that a month later I'd move into the Timothy Wheeler house at 110 Walden Street, So I'm not there yet. You know, there's that little thing that says, you're not there yet. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
So and also, so Leslie, I've heard marvelous things through Marjorie where you keep talking about the difference between working with like a huge press and a huge editor that wants to control everything and about the way the book is formatted and printed and everything, and the luxury of being able to design this book yourself. Can you talk about that? Does that have to do with
Sure, yeah, no, that's exactly why I decided to go with Glade Press. I could have, if I'd wanted to, I could have put the energy into tracking down a commercial or possibly an academic publisher. But in a sense, when you sign a contract with entities like that, they pretty much control the property. And if they want you to do radical edits and change the kind of book that you thought you were writing, they kind of get to do that. And I realized that, no, I've jumped through hoops all my working life. And at this point, I want to create a product that is entirely what I want to create. And so I realized too that, I mean, you're not talking about something that's going to have a huge market out there. It's a niche kind of product.
Yeah.
And so, I'd have to work very hard to sell it to a commercial publisher. And, I don't want to spend 5 years doing that kind of stuff. I want to write this book, publish it, talk about it, and go on to the next book. So
Is there others where do you keep everything? You have a special office in that gorgeous house?
I have my dining room table, which serves also as my Zoom platform, and my desk, and my writing office, and also where I pay my bills. So it's we don't have a separate office here, but it's a lovely house. It's got loads of sunlight. It's got huge Victorian windows, and I feel peace of mind here, the kind of peace of mind that allows me to concentrate. So
yeah. So to talk about the house and the book, can you tell us a little bit more about this woman and what was in her journal in those years, and like, what is that story?
Well, it's an interesting story, but it's not a remarkable story. She was not Margaret Fuller. She was not a big name. Very few of us are. She was a very local presence. And the thing that impressed me about her is that she basically established an independent working life. This is beyond the scope of the diary, but I had to find this out in order to write the introduction to the diary. She had a working life. She was the head of her household that included her mother and her 2 unmarried sisters at a time when women typically took a back seat to men in all kinds of ways. And so, she was not what I would call an active feminist, but she was a feminist by example, and she was a bridge figure in a way, bridging the time when women basically maybe taught school and then got married and had families, with a time now when women have careers and still have families, but when it's more common for women to have careers. And so, and the other thing is that she was fun in some ways. Her personality resonated for me. She was a bit of a, excuse me if I can say this on Zoom, a bit of a smartass. She was funny. Good. I've had this experience in dealing with other manuscript material left behind by women, 19th century women who were ordinary women, so literate, so smart, so funny, so well informed about what's going on, in the world around them. It just clicks, and so it's a strong personality, not a remarkable story, but one that I think is worth telling, because a lot of women like this together help to advance the cause of women over time. People have asked me if she was involved with suffrage, and she was, but it was in a relatively boots on the ground kind of way. She was not into protest or activism, but while she was at Smith, she participated in the canvass of Northampton residents before there was a vote about an amendment to the state constitution to allow women to vote, which of course was defeated in 1915 when it came up. But she did take part in it. And you might know about the 1879 Massachusetts law that allowed women to vote in local elections. That's the law that allowed Louisa May Alcott to vote in the school committee election. Well, she took advantage of that, and after she was out of Smith, she actually registered to vote, and in her diary proudly wrote about going to register to vote in a local election, and then made a point of noting when she actually did go to vote a week or two later. So
yeah, and all of these things, you keep saying that she's not remarkable, but I feel like we all envision our own lives as remarkable. And just reading about somebody like that, who seems like a parallel, to a lot of us, it's not that she has to be Margaret Fuller. It's not that she has to, make a name for herself and be in the newspaper or whatever, but just reading her description of how she's perceiving her own life. I think you're sort of, it's a deep dive into something that you described as niche, but it's also, the universal human experience. So I'm excited to read the book. Yeah.
It's the extraordinary ordinary of it that really resounds. Like, for instance, June 1, there we are, June 1, 1914. 9 exam at 9. Think I did fairly well. Crackers and milk to revive us. 8th wonder. Downtown with Min and Anna studying in the afternoon and evening.
Right?
So when I started looking at, because I brought it so she would autograph it for me. Ta-da. And I started spanning through it knowing we were going to meet. And I thought, oh my gosh, just like Henry's journals, how you tap in every day because they publish everything he ever said backwards and forwards and upside down. And I started looking at that through the month of May while I've been living here at the inn. And really, some of it is just charming. If you take it out of Leslie, how many books have you written, whether you have been in your position or whatever? You've been writing things that I've collected forever.
I've been writing for a while, yeah. Mostly in relation to my work, but
that's the foundation that now you can bring forth that wonderful thing Thoreau says about you've done this, now you put the grounding on you've had castles, now go after them.
Yes, castles in the air.
When you finally put the foundation.
Yeah,
that's what you're doing. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, no, and Leslie, I've definitely come across your name in a lot of different scholarly articles that I've been looking up about Concord and various things. I think even including the story of Martha Hunt.
Absolutely, it's in boxes.
Yeah.
I had I think over time I developed a particular interest in women's stories in Concord, and not necessarily the stories of the women whose names people recognize now, but more ordinary social history kind of stories. And so I did a number of articles. There are a couple of articles about Martha Hunt, and there was a piece, an edited piece based on a memoir of Mrs. Ebenezer Rockwood Hoare. I edited Martha Prescott's diary. I was particularly thrilled. This is not a writing story, although it is to some extent, when we received a collection of Pritchard family papers in the library. And basically it's decades worth of correspondence, largely driven by 3 sisters in a family. And so you get to know these women very well. I ended up not so much writing about it, but using it in exhibition. And writing is part of the broader mission of making material accessible, and that happens in various ways. Exhibition is one of them. talking to groups was one of them when I was at the library. It's all about getting people fired up about that, making the connection with history.
Yeah, and you promised to tell us your how you got into that situation in special collections. Like, how did you first get drawn in? Like, how did you even?
I don't know if you have time for this.
However much you feel is,
Literally, I mean, it happened when I was 19 years old, and I was a student at Wellesley College, and I got married halfway through and just kept on going to school. But very quickly, we were very short on money, and I needed to work to supplement the family income. And so when the curator, the special collections librarian, sent an SOS over to the Latin department because she thought she needed somebody who could read Latin to help her catalog books that had Latin title pages. She didn't know that she really didn't need that, but that's fine.
It certainly helps to have somebody who recognizes.
That's right.
What a Latin word is. Yeah.
So she interviewed a few of us, and honestly, I mean, I could tell. I mean, she was a very good judge of people, and I could see that she understood that I had the right frame of mind to deal with this area of work, which, I don't think before I met her, I realized it was even a thing, rare books and manuscripts. You're 19, you don't know about stuff like that. And so I worked as a student assistant for 2 years, and then she created a job, an assistantship for me, which I held for 5 years. And all the time that I was working for her, she was toward the end of her career. She was at that point in her 60s, an enormously learned woman who had tremendous experience. She'd been the private librarian for Carl Forsheimer, whose collection ended up at Harvard. And this was in New York City in the 1940s and 50s. And anyway,
Leslie, who was her? What was her name?
Oh, Eleanor Louise Nichols. And I mean, she had a fascinating story. She was a Mormon, a lapsed Mormon, basically. And we have, well, that's a distracting conversation. We'll have that one for another time. Save it for another time. Yeah. But she basically gave me my career because she not only, I mean, she told me what she could tell me, but she also made opportunities for me to take classes, and I ended up going to library school. I ended up taking a course in descriptive and analytical bibliography at Harvard, and she allowed me to do exhibitions and things that probably most people beginning a career don't get to do. It was the generosity in that was just enormous, and it was life-changing for me. And so I always felt, well, all right. So back up. So that's Wellesley College. Then I got my library degree. I was still working full-time at Wellesley. And eventually I got the library degree. And then I was overqualified to stay in that job. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking for jobs, and all of a sudden there was a posting for a rare book cataloger at the Concord Free Public Library. It was a position that was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities for a couple of years to catalog the collections of Emerson and Thoreau and the Alcotts and Hawthorne and as many of the other authors as we had time to do in that couple of year period. So I did that project. I left at the end of the project and started my family, and realized very quickly that I needed to work on some level. I mean, I loved having a child, and I planned on having more, but I really, really needed to keep the connection with the work for my emotional well-being. Yeah. And so, I mean, again, what are the chances? I poked around, looked at our local library. It turns out they had a rare book collection, and they have Lancaster was where we lived at the time, and it's a very old town. It's the oldest town in Worcester County, Massachusetts. It was originally part of Middlesex County, but became part of Worcester County when Worcester County was created. And they, like Concord, there's a lot of parallels to the Concord Library, enormous sense of their own history, rich collections on a smaller scale, and also, except for maybe Mary Rollins, and they don't have names that people recognize. It's mostly local history. But for me, it's about the material, not so much about, whether it's important by anybody else's definition of it. It's about the material and what you can do with it and how you can bring it.
And now that you mentioned Mary Rowlandston, can you explain who she is, just for the people who wish they had a footnote at this exact moment?
During the 17th century, she was the wife of the minister of Lancaster, and they were having terrible troubles with the Indians, and Lancaster got wiped out a few times by the Native Americans, and Mary Rowlandston ended up being captured with her young child, and she ended up losing the child on the trek that the Native Americans took her on, and she ended up writing a narrative about her captivity.
And I think Thoreau mentions that in A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers.
Very likely.
Yeah, because I think he's traveling like somewhere, and he's like, we're in that town where stuff happened. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, Mary Rowlandson is the name that people recognize, but in a sense, I was aware of her when I was working on Jenny, because I don't think anybody has a name to attach, a female name to attach to Lancaster and the area that used to be Lancaster, except for Mary Rowlandson. And I thought, this is wrong.
Exactly.
This is really wrong. Because people like Jenny McLeod are, pushing things forward too. And so at any rate, now I've lost track of what I started to.
Exactly. So you were doing special collections in Lancaster.
Oh, okay.
And then
so
how did you get back to Concord?
Well, my kids reached my 3 daughters reached a certain age, and I think that the library director at Concord was getting anxious. Barbara Powell was the library director at the time. She was becoming anxious about making more progress with cataloging collections and making the collections available, accessible, interesting to people. And so she brought me back first on a kind of a consulting basis, and then I wrote a couple of grants that kept me going for a couple of years. And then my predecessor as curator, Marcia Moss.
Yes, I knew her.
You remember Marcia?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, she retired in 1996, and so I applied for her job and took over at that point. So it's been very consistent, continuous. It's in some sense it's a very boring story, but but I owe it all to Eleanor Nichols, because if she hadn't said, okay, here's the one.
Yeah, and so in that way, it's not boring at all, because I feel like when we're all telling our own life stories, it's those moments, it's the people who made those connections that, it's not like lightning came out and, shocked you and told you this is how the rest of your life is going to go. It's right. These little people who are like, oh, Latin? Oh, yeah. Your brain works like this. I think you actually might be good at this job.
Yeah, right. Well, and then that what she did to open up this field for me really made me conscious of my responsibility to do the same once I was in a position to do so. And so we used to, at Concord, I probably had 100 or 120 interns from Simmons College over the years. They would come and do a semester working on a collection, and it would be part of their grade for, part of their coursework. And so I was just very aware that I needed to pass on what I could tell to these people, tell them,
Yeah.
And, I felt like that it was a great investment. It was just sort of paying it back.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for all of the people watching today, because I'm assuming a lot of our audience are librarians and, historians and people who, love this field, whether they work in it or not, what kind of advice would you give to them? And Marjorie, you're welcome to jump in here as well.
Hold on a second. I just want to add that as of 2001, was trekking to the library, pushing the doorbell, and that poor woman had to get up from her desk on the other side of the room to let anybody in. It was just, I always felt guilty. And sometimes I didn't tell her I was coming, and then she'd look up and there I was again. And one day she told me,
It is always a delightful surprise.
thank you. But then one day she said, because I would park my stuff there, because I mean, especially the house stuff I was looking at. And then I would park my stuff there, and then I would leave it there, you know, and then it was like I had my own little writing corner in Concord when I wasn't even living here. Couldn't get a library card though, but now I can because I
You live there.
and again, you don't need to go to a library, you said, because everything's online, Marjorie, and it wasn't nearly as much fun.
Yeah, no.
So here we are. And then what Tammy's doing with all of the ghosts of Concord past, especially the women, I mean, really, they're just all coming out and making themselves known. And here I am living here for over a month now. And, you know, I watched them come with their cameras to take the sounds of the ghosts in room 24. And I'm not mocking it at all.
No, it's like Ghost Adventures or whatever. There are people visiting the
It's
colonial
lovely.
land,
And then, of
trying
course,
to do a seance or whatever. Yeah. And like,
because-
that's a whole other industry as well. And anything that gets people excited about history, even if it's like a playful thing like that, you know, it's,
So, you know, fascinating. So go on with your tale, because
Well, I actually stayed in room 24 once during my working career just to see if I could sense anything. And I was so bitterly disappointed.
oh no.
The ghost did not manifest.
they don't come when they're expected.
But you know what? I don't, you know, I don't brush the whole thing aside, because I have had people come into special collections over the years who I could see were deeply moved and deeply believed that they had experienced something. And so, you know what?
I would say I've certainly been visited by ghosts and writers just by reading. And it's almost as if they're like reaching up out of the book and grabbing me and saying, pay attention to this. This is very important. And that's my favorite way of being haunted. You know, so maybe all the ghosts are actually at the library and they were like, yeah, we'll let her sleep tonight.
Well, you know what? I mean, I've always said, you're not going to like this necessarily. You don't really need to go to Concord to fully appreciate Concord. It's in the writings, you know.
Yeah.
You can read Emerson and Thoreau from anywhere in the world. And while maybe you can't make the direct connection between a particular place name, you know, you can't form a visual, you get it. Their spirit lives on in their words.
Yeah. And there's so many people who love to tell me how they're finding their own Walden, you know,
Exactly.
all over the world. And,
and building cabins.
Yeah.
and building cabins. Yeah.
It used to distress me to no end when people would come. They're making pilgrimages, and that's fine. But they just didn't need to do that in order to appreciate Thoreau. They needed to follow his advice and go. I mean, I feel to some extent that's what I was doing with the Jenny book, right? You find meaning and reality in the place where you live, right? The place that you know best, not in some other place. And you know, I feel like I was sort of applying Thoreau to my situation.
Yeah, where you know, Thoreau barely left his hometown and never saw the need to go to Europe, never saw the need to travel like everybody else. And he was like, I've traveled extensively in Concord and,
right.
you know, walked for 4 hours a day and knew the place exceedingly well. And
every nook and cranny, you know, I don't know if you've ever looked at the Thoreau surveys, but to understand how he understood the landscape and, you know, you look at his river survey and, you know, every little hay bridge and you know, he really knew the place inside and out. I mean, you could call it obsessive, except that's where he was drawing his strength from and his abilities from. So.
Right. You can call it obsessive and still have it be your main joy in life, you know?
That's true.
Yeah.
That is obsession, right?
right, exactly.
Right.
So wait, so I want to make sure to get this piece of advice because I'm sure you have.
Right.
So Leslie, like if I signed up to be your intern tomorrow, like what would be your main advice to me?
Well, first of all, I would say you have to have the degree in archives these days in order to work in an archive. So I would tell you to finish the degree. And then I would tell you that your entire future depends on the quality of the collections that you work with, because there are all kinds of places that have rare books and manuscripts, but you want a place that's got some substance and some actual history to tell. And I feel like I was lucky along the way. You know, Lancaster had plenty, and Wellesley College had collections that supported some serious academic research, which you know, I thought was important. And then of course Concord, you know, the collections there, they're not unparalleled, but they're really deep collections, interlocking collections where people can, you know, they can tell a good story because the collections allow them to tell a good story. And you know, you can learn a lot from the collections, and you can expand your future by really delving into the collections, but you have to have the collections first. So I would say be choosy about, you know, where you decide to spend your time. You know, go to a place that's worthwhile. It doesn't have to be a big name place, but it needs to be a place that has serious collections.
Yeah. And especially when it comes to Concord, when you say like it's deep and it's very like heavily embedded within itself, people were reading each other's journals, you know, especially in Thoreau's time. I felt like everybody knew that like writing was this like such an important thing that I'm sure that lots of people write journals not expecting them to ever be read. But I'm sure that there were lots of people writing letters saying, oh, it's possible that, you know, this is going to be in Emerson's collection, and, you know, my name is going to come up somewhere in the future. What was your favorite like item that you ever discovered in the Concord collection?
Well, I think actually my personal favorite item was probably the collection of books that survived from Elizabeth Peabody's foreign library. And those are books that Elizabeth Peabody gave them to the library in the 1870s when she was living in Concord with her brother Nathaniel over on Hubbard Street. Not all of the books that she gave came from the foreign library, and the foreign library had been kind of dispersed to some extent over the years, but there were hundreds of books that she gave that came from that library. And I just remember at one point working on one of the Concord authors whose writings I was cataloging, and pulling something off the shelf in the stacks and seeing a bookplate that said that it had been given by Elizabeth Peabody. And, you know, this happened a few times. It took me a little while before I realized, wait a moment, something's going on here. And then I was able to go back into the records and find out that she had given these books. And then I was able to organize a project where I had a volunteer who helped me go from the original accession records through the library catalog and pulling everything that was left of from the gift that she had made. And it was thrilling because that was a very important nexus, the foreign library was, for the transcendentalists in the 1840s. And
for those of our audience members who may not be familiar with Elizabeth Peabody, one of my favorite books is the Peabody Sisters. And it talks about not only Elizabeth, but also Sophia, who ended up married to Nathaniel Hawthorne. And then her other sister, who is married to Horace Mann, and how Elizabeth Peabody's bookstore. I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day, where imagine being in America in the 1830s, 1840s, wanting to be a scholar, wanting to read, and just not really having access to books.
Right.
I mean, like, what do? You open up a bookstore and you get a steady stream of books from Europe, from all over the place. And then, of course, that's where Margaret Fuller held her conversations.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, Elizabeth Peabody is a very interesting character. She was a terrible businesswoman, terrible. The bookstore didn't survive all that long, but it was an important place in terms of intellectual history. And so, you know, that was thrilling for me. There were a few gifts along the way, a few purchases along the way that just mean, they made my heart sing. You know, the Pritchard sisters that I was talking about, when that collection came as a gift relatively close to the time I retired, within, I think, 5 or 6 years of the time that I retired. And, you know, it came sort of, the lady was trying to find a place to give this collection that her mother had left behind. And she wasn't fully aware of the, you know, the players in the story, you know, that were reflected in the letters. And she'd asked various people in Concord, you know, and finally got directed to me. And she said, I'm gonna get rid of this stuff unless I can find a home for it. And, you know, and when she described what she had, it seemed to me like it was worthwhile. And then she sent a box of it, and it was like, oh my God, you know. And then, you know, and earlier it had the experience of a collection of poor family papers, which literally came in paper bags and an iron box and a metal box. And, you know, the lady was aware of what it was, but she wasn't all that impressed by it. And you know,
Right.
she walked in and she said, do you want any of this stuff? And I'm looking through it and I'm seeing presidential letters and what have you. I'm saying, oh yeah, I definitely want this. And then there were a couple of purchases, the Gleason photographs, Herbert Wendell Gleason photographs, landscape of Concord and really landscapes across North America. And I was able to buy that. Actually, that was the first purchase that I made. The reason that Special Collections is able to buy stuff is because I don't know if you know about the library's joint public-private form of management. It's not entirely a public library. The buildings, the Fowler Building and the Main Street Building, the artwork, the property and Special Collections are all owned by the private nonprofit Concord Free Public Library Corporation, which supports the Special Collections. That's not supported except for the staffing by the town of Concord. And so staffing is a big item to support, but still, you know, if you want to buy something, it's the corporation that gets appealed to. And they were always very generous in responding to things that I would recommend, starting with the Gleason collection. And I mean, it was just a thrill to be able to bring those into the library.
Yeah.
But as far as discoveries, I think probably from the point of view of people coming into the library, the thing that is the most requested item is the manuscript for Thoreau's essay Walking. And that, you know, that brings people to tears, you know, pretty predictably. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
As does, so one of the things that I saw, and one of the relics that I visited, the lovely librarian right now is Anka Voss, and
Yes.
she brought out, I think it's the copy of Walden that Thoreau had inscribed to Emerson.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So just being able to see that and knowing that that was such an intimate object, it feels me, like I cried, you know. And I was also able to see the scrapbook that Helen Thoreau had created. Her anti-slavery scrapbook, like one of many. And it's just amazing to go through it and see all of the, you know, how attentive she was to details and every single mention of anything happening, you know, because I feel like she's one of the silent, you know, women of history where, oh yeah, you know, Henry had 2 sisters. And, you know, Sophia helped him during his final illness and helped make sure his name was known, but you don't really hear a lot about Helen, but, you know, she deserves significant.
Well, I used to call things like that people want to see and want to connect with pieces of the true cross, you know. But I have to, I mean, I confess, I'll be totally straightforward. I don't care for objectifying things like that. I feel like you look at the Walking manuscript and it tells a story. It has meaning. It's alive in a way. And you can see, you know, there's a lot about Thoreau's writing process that you can tell from looking at that manuscript. And that's the real purpose of it. I don't I was never able to forget that, that there's scholarship, or at least writing and intellectual endeavor behind these things. So.
So I do a podcast where I'm trying to read all of Walden. And last week I had just done the reading chapter 3. And there's a line exactly that he writes about that, where, of all of the arts, writing is really the only way that we can actually inhabit the writer's or the creator's original intent, by literally giving breath to the words. And I think that's speaking to what you're talking about, because if it's a statue, you're looking at marble. If it's a painting, you're looking at this canvas. But right? Yeah. So, and Marjorie, please jump in here, because I know that you're a regular visitor to special collections too. And I feel like Leslie, granted, if you work there every day, you're going to understand that it's all just paper. But for somebody, a visitor like me and Marjorie, Marjorie, what would you say is your most requested item when you go?
At the library?
Yeah.
All of it. I come out of it I was fascinated with the whole mystique of Thoreau when I was a kid, but then of course life took you away from that and didn't mean that much unless I was living here 3 different times. And then I would work on something or other and ended up publishing something with the Concord Journal in '83. So in fact, Jeffrey Kramer, who runs the Walden Woods Project, he had a copy of it. I didn't. So he sent it to me and I thought, oh my God, what was I doing writing about I really didn't know much about anything except I was enchanted with Walden. And when my friends said, what are you interested in that? When I found an old copy and practically, went crazy. And, it was all that. So this builds up this amazing art knowledge that you all are but continuing to bring out. And I believe that the voices of Concord past, I'm more interested in the 19th century than wars, but that's just me. But I really feel that it is more relevant today than it was 200 years ago or less. But regardless, everything that we're posting, like when Tammy's reading the Walden thing, I subscribe to that. What's the name of the thing that I pay $10 a month or something like that?
Yeah, so it's on Anchor, right? Anchor. And with Anchor, you can buy sponsorships or you can listen for free. Yeah.
It's lovely. And so, you take all of these works that are just mammoth when you try to devour them, and then you break them down into seasons or dates. And then it begins to build your own understanding of living intentionally. And that's the point of it all for me.
Yeah.
Why I've returned here. I really feel that if we don't really learn how to live intentionally, we're going to get in more and more trouble. The planet is hurting. We've got to do something. So here we have this bubble called Concord, and it just steams with energy.
Yeah.
I remember when Leslie, though, you said, oh, I don't want to even deal with it anymore. You were just inundated.
I can imagine. And there are times when I think all of us are sort of overwhelmed by the sense of importance and history. And, I love swimming in Walden. So sometimes I just want to go for a swim.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be haunted by all the ghosts, but, everything sort of comes up. But the same thing that you were saying before about how, you don't need to come to Concord to have this sense of, as Marjorie says, living intentionally. You don't need to visit the actual space, because we all need to live our own lives, and we need to figure out our lives. Yeah.
And that's the absolute beauty of retirement, is that you get to control your own destiny to some extent. Mother Nature has a hand in that, but you choose what you're going to work on, what you're going to pay attention to, and that is intentional.
Or you take a quantum leap and decide to do it anyway, like our Tammy is doing.
Well, and I always think it's so funny when people are talking about retirement, yet here you are publishing a book, and it doesn't sound like, it sounds like retirement is just another level of achievement, where it's you've unlocked this freedom, and it's not like you're stopping working.
It's a fulfillment. I feel like in a sense it's a continuation of everything I've always done, except that it is more, it's more at my own direction. I feel like I'm the little engine that could at this point.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. So is there anything that we haven't talked about or anything that you want to revisit that we barely touched upon?
Well, there probably is, but I think I've said what I need to say.
And I'm sure we can have another conversation in the future because,
I'd love to.
Yes, I'm certain that you're going to go on to more and exciting projects, and I want to be here for all of it.
Great.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Marjorie. This was absolutely wonderful. Thanks to all of the audiences who are watching. And again, we have a Facebook group called Transcendentalist 2021. And the podcast is called Walden the Book and Concord the Town. And that can be found on Anchor and Spotify and all the podcast places. And thank you very much for tuning in to this YouTube playlist of Concord Days. We're always pleased to have people watching and to be recording the history of Concord as it happens. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity.